lift this up in prayer. It's a little bit different today, because I'm not used to presenting to a camera. So if you just bow your heads with me. Lord God, thank you so much for just allowing us to gather together. Lord, I pray, as you're obviously doing some things in our churches, in our church and the people of this church, since we've all been kind of speaking the same message today, I just thank you for giving us a unified heart and a unified mind in the amazing things that you have for us going forward. And we just lift you up in each of our individual places. As we gather together, even though we are not in the church building, we just thank you so much that we are the church, that the people who are here in this moment, we can see that church is not confined to the walls of the building, but extends into our house and into our neighborhoods and into the world around us. And Lord, I pray that we'll just keep that in mind as we go through this message and we go through our lives this week, especially seeing hurting people around us, people with needs. I just pray that we can find an opportunity to serve the people in our lives and meet those needs. And we just lift you up today. Amen. Cool. So yeah, again, thank you guys for coming. It's going to be a little bit weird. I'm kind of reading, but also talking to the camera, but I can't see anybody. I don't have any jokes today because then I wouldn't know exactly how long to pause for laughter and things. And don't want to make it awkward in that regard. So we'll just kind of see how it goes with this kind of message in this format. Because in the past, we just had them all recorded and then this is live. So hopefully it goes as well as it does in person. So as we've gone through the last several messages, the last few weeks, since the beginning of the year, we've been trying to keep basically reminding you about all the tools that you have in your evangelism toolbox, like these different approaches to evangelism. And unfortunately, even though we're talking about each of these things 1 week and, one week on it and 1 hour and 1 week or whatever is not enough to fully equip a person to go out and be like this kind of evangelizing machine, right? So, at best, we can kind of remind you at what you already have and then encourage you to use what you have kind of as best you can. I'm just checking to make sure that I don't have any messages so no one can hear me or anything. Okay, cool. So I mentioned in the early weeks about how, some of these weeks and some of these approaches, maybe it's testimonial or intellectual or confrontational or service approaches to evangelism. We've covered all of these and we talked about how some of these might come easier for you than others. And so it's easy for us to kind of fall into the one that is most comfortable for us. One thing we have to remember though, with each of these approaches is that evangelism isn't about us and isn't necessarily about what I'm good at, but it's about the other person, the person on the other side of the interaction. And so, especially as we're looking at that, like if, let's say, I have the confrontational approach to evangelism, but that person is not in a place where, hearing that confrontational approach will help them, but maybe the intellectual approach or maybe serving them maybe more. Just because I'm good at one, we want to make sure that we are taking that other person to account. And so today we're going to look at the interpersonal approach to evangelism. So that seems like it's a big word, and I'm going to give you some fancy, super secret, special way to interact with people on a personal level to help them see Jesus. But here's the deal. It's not all that special and it's not all that secret. And in fact, you're probably already doing it. All the interpersonal approach is being a friend with somebody, getting to know them on a deeper personal level and sharing the love of Christ through your words and through your actions. And what's crazy is as we think about it right now, we live in a society that is becoming more and more disconnected, especially with, the new normal that's coming up, that people have talked about, late last year about how social distancing is probably going to be a thing that, that we are going to be experiencing for a long time. We just closed, like our company this week just closed down our Dallas office, and that they're going completely remote. And actually more and more software technology companies and probably around the world, different kind of different industries are probably realizing, well, we can do a lot of our stuff from home, and then we don't need, to pay for rent and buildings, a lot of that stuff, and all of our lives are moving increasingly to Zoom, and this kind of thing. And as we become more and more disconnected as a society, I think it's the interpersonal ministry of the church that is really going to be probably the most necessary approach that we have. There are going to be a lot of people who are just, they're just dying to have someone, to care for them. Like we as humans need that kind of interaction. And so I think it's a really interesting place, as the church, we're called to be more personal. And so hopefully we can become more and more connected with people, even as society disconnects more and more. So as we get closer to people, we kind of get to know them personally. That's how we know kind of where they're at in their spiritual journey. We can know what needs they may have, and we can figure out how best to meet them. And as we get to know these things about them, we can kind of look at all the previous approaches that we've had and kind of figure out which one will be the quote unquote most effective. As I was kind of, thinking about a lot of these kind of approaches and, the word, as I was even kind of writing this, the words like most effective felt almost gross. Like it felt dirty to say that it's like the most effective approach to evangelism. And the reason why I did that is because it made it seem like we are like focusing on a project rather than a person. If we are focused on the effective ways to bring somebody to Christ and not really seeing them for people and as people and, anything like that, we're kind of missing the point of what Christ did and kind of the way that he became a personal God to each and every one of us. And so when we start talking, a lot of times when we start talking and start training about evangelism and things like that, it seems like we're almost saying here's a formula, for intellectual evangelism or service evangelism or whatever, go do that and you're going to be successful. Unfortunately, though, people don't conform to a formula because people are unpredictable, people are messy, people are broken. There's a phrase that they use at High Point that says that, broken people have sharp edges and sometimes those edges hurt, right? So if we focus on just these formulas, it's going to be very difficult for us going forward to, make sure that we are being effective, especially if we're treating it as a project. It's not always easy, and honestly, it probably is never easy. So instead of starting from a place of formula, I think that we should fall back to what we do as humans and generally care for people, and meet people where they are. It's interesting though, as we talk about formulas, we do need to think about these things, and it's not just the church that does this kind of training and thinking. And in fact, one of the most popular books, and some of you may have read it, is How to Win Friends and Influence People. So this is something that normally, they'll suggest in kind of the professional sector in a lot of different sales and business, company, whatever sectors they're going to promote this book, like How to Win Friends and Influence People. But it's funny because the 6 ways of to how to win friends and influence people is kind of what we see Paul and Christ doing. The first one is become genuinely interested in other people. There's 6 ways to get people to like you. So become genuinely interested in people. Smile. Remember that the person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language. Be a good listener. Encourage others to talk about themselves. Talk in terms of the other person's interests and make the other person feel important and do it sincerely. But what that really comes to is Don't be focused so much on ourselves and what we have to say, but spend time and really focus on the other person. In 1 Corinthians 9, we see Paul, talking about his ministry. And in verse 19, he says, though I am free and belong to no one, I have made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. Verse 20 says, to the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like the one under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak, I became weak to win the weak, to become all things to all people, so that by all possible means, I might save some. It's interesting here because he's saying, go meet people where they are. Understand who that person is, just like it's saying in this book, which is completely secular. Become genuinely interested in other people, be a good listener, encourage them to talk about themselves, ask them questions, talk in terms of that person's interest. To those people, become like those people, so that you can get close to them. So Paul here is telling us to join people in their lives. As we do that, we get to know their struggles. We understand, we can celebrate their successes. We can know how to respond to things, and we can know what their needs are, not just physical needs, which we can meet some of those, but a lot of people have emotional needs and spiritual needs and mental needs, that they're struggling with, and we can help them in that. But part of that is knowing where they are in their journey. To know which of these approaches or which needs to meet. Paul gives us another example. In Thessalonians, 1 Thessalonians 2, 8 through 12, which you can turn there. But he's talking to them and he says, so we cared for you. And he says, because we loved you so much, we were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our lives as well. Surely you remember, brothers and sisters, our toil and hardship. We work day and night in order not to be a burden to anyone while we preach the gospel to you. You are witnesses, and so is God, of how holy, righteous, and blameless we were among you who believed. For you know that we dealt with each other as a father deals with his own children, encouraging, comforting, and urging you to live lives worthy of God, who calls you into his kingdom and glory. So it's really amazing here to and this kind of points on what Keith was saying in the discussion of discipleship, and basically what Paul is saying, especially in verse 8, he says, because we loved you so much, we were delighted not to share with you not only the gospel, but our lives as well. And I think that this is, an amazing thing, and this is part of what Keith was talking about, and why I said, thank you so much for kind of preaching the message for me, at least, in our class. And I encourage you all to join that class as we talk about discipleship, because I think it's going to be great going forward. That's at 9:30, always before the service. So whether you're on Zoom or whatever, you can still jump in or come into the church and join us for that. But what he was saying there is that there's different ways that you can share Christ to other people. Generally, we focus on like two extremes. It feels like one is to focus like solely on sharing the gospel. So that's like, like handing out tracts, or, I think David was talking about street preaching, a few weeks ago, or whatever. Like we kind of throw out the gospel to as many people as we can and hope someone grabs it. It's kind of a numbers game, so to speak, but it's really kind of spreading the seed kind of as far and wide as it can go. And that's definitely a necessary part of kind of this journey we're on. But that's kind of an extreme, because we're not really getting to know people on that individual level in that act. But then we kind of go the other way, which is where people will kind of go the friendship route and never actually get to the point of sharing the gospel. They never get to the point of showing Christ to people around them. Here, Paul says that they did both, right? We are delighted with you not only to share the gospel of God, but also our lives as well. He saw how important the ministry of Christ is and the impact of his own life, and of course, dedicated his entire life to going out and sharing that love and sharing the message of Christ and the gospel. So of course, he shared it. He was probably overflowing with it and couldn't contain himself because of, the transformation he had. And while Paul definitely did teach the people of Christ and shared the gospel with them, it says here, in verse 12, is he said he was also encouraging them and comforting them as he shared his life with them. He was able to see where they were and meet those needs, those probably more emotional needs, as well as, working hard so he wasn't a burden on people, and probably was helping people with their physical needs as well. But it's interesting to see here, because it seems to me that preaching alone was not enough. We can, the friendship side, like sharing that life together, was also important. We can also see that friendship without the gospel, though, isn't enough. I mean, it's a great thing to do that, but at the end of the day, we are called to go forth and make disciples of all nations, right? We love because he first loved us. And so it's important for us to understand that friendship without the gospel also isn't enough. One tendency I think that we have is like, especially whenever, and this is one of the big kind of arguments against interpersonal or friendship evangelism, is that a lot of people will go into a relationship or a friendship with people, and they kind of hide their Christian side at first, right? And they try to become real close friends, and they try to like win people over with their niceness, and just kind of hide the fact that they're Christians for, weeks, months, years, and then the whole idea, between some of these approaches or teachings on that is to wait until like that perfect moment to like, I guess, spring the bait and switch trap, and then start sharing the gospel with them. But what generally happens is you either get to a point where you feel uncomfortable sharing your faith. So now you've spent, a couple weeks, a couple months with them or whatever, and then you might fear of losing that friendship if you start bringing up spiritual things. And so a lot of people get afraid and then never actually bring it up and never kind of invite them into, the love of God. And so that kind of, like we never actually get to that point. Or it may feel like, you get to that point and you've gone months and months and months and you've been working with this person, to grow, to build this like relationship or friendship with, and finally share your faith with them. And what happens when they don't accept it? What happens when they're not ready? What happens if they're not in that moment, like they're not to a point where they're ready to accept Christ? These things take time. And it end up leaving you feeling discouraged, or that it was a waste of time. I hope not, if you are actually friends with those people. But if the only reason this was like a big project and the only reason you were, being friends with them for that amount of time was to, eventually drop the Jesus bomb and hope that they accept it, then it may feel discouraging kind of at the end of that. So at some point we need to really be able to strike a balance between sharing the gospel and also reaching them personally. And I think that what Keith was mentioning today goes into a deeper discussion on how we can do that, right? Like how we can be with them and understand where people are, as well as sharing the gospel and sharing our lives with them. But I think that a big part of that is, sharing in their lives and them sharing in ours as well. And we shouldn't hide, even from the very beginning, we should not hide kind of the Christian side. Basically, just as Paul realized kind of the massive change in his own life and shared it, he was speaking that gospel probably in everyday conversations, but also encouraged people on a very personal level as well. So as I mentioned, not only with the disconnected society that we're in, I think that another reason why the interpersonal approach is probably the most important approach that we're looking at, because it encompasses all of the others. As you get to know people, you can see where their questions are, where their doubts are. And then you can help them by answering those questions using the kind of intellectual approach. You can use apologetics. You can go, find different articles. You can take the time to kind of answer those questions or doubts, in a conversational way rather than if you just get into a debate with somebody over, spiritual things or whatever. This allows you to really kind of help dig deep and answer those questions from an apologetic and an intellectual approach. As you get to know people, as you grow in this interpersonal approach, you may see the needs that they have, whether that's some sort of physical need that they have, and you can take this service approach by meeting those needs, by helping talk people through stuff, whatever that might be. But as we get to know people, we can see those needs and meet them. As we follow the interpersonal approach and we get to know people, we may see areas of their lives that could benefit from a more direct approach, right? Some people may not be ready to hear about the sin in their lives. Some people may need to hear that. And the only way that you're going to know if somebody is ready for that is to get to know them. But we need, to speak truth in love. Even Paul here says we encouraged you. And he also says in verse 12 that we urge them, that he urged the people of Thessalonica, but we also are called to encourage people and urge them to live lives worthy of God, who calls you into his kingdom and glory. Some people may do really well with that approach, but as you get to know them through the interpersonal approach, you have an easier time to know where they're at. And of course, as you get to know people and you work on this interpersonal approach, you have the opportunity to share your testimony, to share your unique story about what Christ has done. And when somebody close to you hears this story, hears your testimony, it gives it a whole lot of credibility because they know you as an individual. So it's a great, whenever we're talking about the interpersonal approach, it's really getting close to people, and it encompasses all of the others. In John 4, Christ approaches the Samaritan woman at the well, and basically when just meeting with her, he knows that if he speaks of living water, that would spark her interest. He also was able to know, without asking or finding out any more information, that she wasn't married and had 5 husbands previously, right? He knew all of these things because he was there when everything was created, right? We're all his creatures. But since we weren't there at the time of creation, we don't have the same ability to know immediately what any individual needs. And since we don't know immediately, it is up to us to spend that time and share our lives with them. And just as we share our lives, and as we share our lives with them and grow closer to them, we don't hide the fact, that we are in Christ, and we want to share that. And really, if they reject it, especially if you share it early on, and if they reject it, don't be encouraged, don't be discouraged. Continue to serve, continue to speak life and truth over them, continue to share your story and your testimony, continue to look for opportunities to serve them and to discuss their questions, fears, doubts. But what it really comes down to is whether they accept or not, we should just show love to them. If you're at either one of these two extremes, because most of us will probably go one way or the other, I encourage you to take some time and really think about it and reach into the other. If you've got friendships that have gone on for a long time without showing who you are in Christ, I encourage you to share who you are. I encourage you to share the blessings that Christ has given you. I encourage you to share your unique story of what Christ has done for you. And to, as you're doing that, feel free to pray for them. It seems that I've noticed that whether it's, agnostics or atheists, I have yet to have somebody really angry at me for offering to pray for them. In fact, most people, welcome it, because I think a lot of people are searching for something bigger than they are, but they've got some hurt, some personal hurt deep inside. And so whatever you do, like, don't be afraid to share that with them. I think most people are looking for something. But specifically, whether they accept it or whether they reject it, whether they accept you, whether they reject you, love them because Christ first loved us. And as Christ continues to love and forgive and encourage us, let's let that overflow to the world around us. Let's be seen as people who love and encourage and forgive, and that we point to where that first loving and encouraging and forgiveness came from. So I think we've got one more song, but as we close today and as we finish, I just encourage you to think of someone in your life who may be at those extremes. Make an effort to share Christ with those that you've developed friendships with for a while and maybe haven't shared that recently, or make an effort to share in the lives of the people that God has placed around you, that you've shared the gospel with in the past, and just maybe try and spend that time and share your life with them, and share in their life as well. Mike, do you have a song for us?
I have a song I can share with you. It's an